Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here. I have 10-year-old twins, so even being on a plane by myself is a spa. So it's really, I'm happy to give a talk while I'm actually spying for the next day or so. But like any good teacher, professor, to put you at ease, I'm going to start with a pop quiz. What do you think this is? What do you think is happening here? More importantly, what do you think are some of the bodily sensations? And you don't have to say them out loud, and we're going to keep it kind of clean. But when you have a crush on someone, think about some of the things that you might feel. A lot of people describe an increased heart rate. They get butterflies in their stomach. They breathe a little faster. Some people think of themselves as blushing. And when we think about what these physiological responses can do and how they... Oh, that's a different story. So if you jumped in for a quick swim and you saw this guy, what kind of bodily sensations might occur? Heart rate would go up, your respiration would increase, your stomach would do something, and you would probably flush instead of blush. So really tonight I'm here to speak to you about the dangers of dating. Actually, that's not true either. Hopefully, all those body signals, once they get to your brain, elicit different behavior, right? Because in an ideal world, we should respond very differently to, I have a crush, I'm about to be crushed. Those should provoke very different responses. And this comes down to an old ideas about emotion and cognition. And this sense that the emotional system is literally that, it's feelings, it's bodily states. And the cognition is how we come to think about them. And what I would like to try to convince you tonight to think about is that, yes, these systems exist, and when you're quite young, they exist very independently. But part of the job of human development, part of the work of human development, is to actually blend these systems, get these systems fully coordinated, working well together across time. Because, and this is something that, it's a hard sell to your age group, but there is no decision you make that is completely free of emotion or free of decision. Once these guys get together, that's how you combine those. The process, there's often some commotion in the process, but every decision you make is informed both by emotion and cognition, so both by feeling and by thinking. But until we get to understand, as individuals, what our body signals mean to us, they're not always as useful as they will be in the long run. So we're going to talk about that. Here are the three things I would like to cover, and this is why you have to be really smart to do neuroscience, because these are super insightful, very things you've probably never thought about. The first one doesn't even make sense, frankly, that adolescents can't feel the future. Well, who can? Fair enough. And what adolescents are known for sort of not planning the future well or not anticipating the future well. What I'm going to try to convince you of is it's not so much an issue of thinking, cognition, it's not so much an issue of knowledge or what they know. It really is more of an issue of their inability to predict how they're going to feel in situations. The second one is a profound thought that I'm sure, even if you have teenagers in your life, you've never thought of, but their friends are important. Yeah, I added my own emphasis, the a lot there. That's scientifically for me. And then the last thing we're going to cover is something just really provocative, that really, during human development, there really isn't anything such as failure. There's no such thing, unless you stop. Other than stopping, no such thing as failure. Now, in order for all this to make sense, I'm going to have to teach you a little bit of neuroscience, and I don't want anybody to be nervous about it, because it's actually quite straightforward, and I promise I will walk you through it quickly and painlessly. We're going to start with one of my favorite brain structures, and I say one of them because I do have a couple, because I'm a nerd, and that's what I do. The amygdala is one of my very favorites. The amygdala is a very primitive brain structure. We all have them. Dogs have them, cats have them, even lizards have them. The amygdala, here in red, down deep in the brain, is a primitive structure. It's the brain's burglar alarm. It keeps you alive. Its one job is to keep you alive. It checks everything in your surroundings to figure out if you need to deal with that. And in science, we think of it as being responsible for the 4 F's. Now, a lot of you have probably heard of the fight or flight response. Maybe you heard the fight or flight response? Okay, that's this guy. The amygdala it kicks off the fight or flight response. But it also deals with feeding. Anything related to food, because food helps you stay alive. So if we run into each other and you give me a great cheesecake, the next time I see you, my amygdala is going to be like, that's good, don't get stressed. That's a good person, they have cheesecake. We need that. Likewise, if you're going to fight, the amygdala is really good at speeding up your heart rate, getting blood out to your muscles, actually shutting off your digestion, or fleeing, same thing with fleeing. It's going to shut your digestion off, blood flow to muscles, shut your reproduction off. Because honestly, if you're running for your life from a tiger, is that the best time to ovulate? Probably not. Let's be honest, probably not. So it's a good call. The amygdala also has a direct projection up to the thinking portion of the brain and can shut off higher cognition under stress. And this is something to think about, again, because if you're running for your life, you don't need to do long division in that moment. But if you're constantly in a situation where you're under chronic stress, what happens with people who are under chronic stress? Digestive issues, reproductive issues, cognitive issues. We weren't built to have this guy firing all the time. This was supposed to be for emergency use only. But in contemporary society, it gets used a little more than that, and it's something, the more you know about it, the more you might be able to do about it. The fourth F is actually really important when we think about keeping ourselves alive. The fourth F is actually reproduction. Flirting. Okay. So you don't want this guy, and believe me, the amygdala is a guy. You don't want this guy, food, fighting, come on, this is a guy. You don't want him running around unsupervised. So to compensate for this and to make us human, we have a big portion of our brains called the frontal lobe. And this is why you need a PhD, because neuroscience is really hard. Because the frontal lobe is in the front. It's in the front part of the brain. It's the frontal lobe. I'll recap that later so you guys can get it. The frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is really very much like a conductor. And many of you probably have heard the expression executive function, and that it does executive work. I really like to think of it as a board of directors. The frontal lobe does lots and lots and lots of different things. And we could do a whole lecture just on the magic of the frontal lobe. But the frontal lobe is you. It's the last to develop. It's the first to wither. It's the most dynamic. It's the most different portion of our brains among us. It takes the longest to become because it really does help you be you in your environment. That's why it waits to develop. It wants to help you thrive where you are. Now, what it also is really amazing at doing is it produces behavior. Without a frontal lobe, there's no behavior. Some of you may have heard of a frontal lobotomy. If you haven't, don't get one. Even if there's a discount, just don't. Without a frontal lobe, no behavior comes out of a human being. Without the frontal lobe, no behavior comes out. So I like to use an analogy to music and a conductor. The frontal lobe is a little more like the conductor of music. And music in this analogy is human behavior. So if you think of an orchestra, many different sections, many different pieces, and to play beautiful music, that conductor's got to get all the different sections to work at the right pace, at the right volume, at the right time to make beautiful music. And that's what the frontal lobe does. It taps different pieces of brain to get something done, and it gets them all organized, and then it produces the behavior. So in this analogy, imagine if an orchestra had been practicing the Brandenburg concertos, and they had it down, and it's performance night, conductor taps the baton, instruments up, and at the very last minute, the horns think, you know, we're going to play Beyonce. How's that going to sound? Weird. It's going to sound weird. It's going to sound wrong. That's bad behavior. The frontal lobe has a plan. It gets everybody going. Everyone's on point. And then one part of the brain's like, yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm going to do my own thing. That's much more likely to happen if things are not as coordinated, not as practiced as they will be as you get older. So when you're younger, this happens much more frequently. One way we understand this is through the well-known case study of Phineas Gage. And many of you have heard of Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker in Vermont who had a pole blown under his cheek out the top of his head. It landed about 30 yards away. And I'm from New England. So I think I know what he said. He did not lose consciousness. He didn't lose consciousness. Didn't fall down. He was standing there. And I think he probably said, geez. But I wasn't there, so I don't know for sure. But he's from Vermont, so that's probably what he said. But anyway, they took him over to Dartmouth Hitchcock, and they patched up his head, and they patched up his cheek, and they sent him home, and he was fine. Totally fine. Well, except for he developed what we would call clinically, he became a total jerk. He started going out to bars. He started getting in fights. He became impulsive. He made rash decisions. He became argumentative. He used to be the manager of his crew and no longer showed up on time. And was petulant and difficult. And I don't know if that reminds you of any other group of people, but you might see a similarity or two. Quick to argue, impulsive, difficult. But there's an important difference. And this is a very important difference. And this is if there's one takeaway here, this might be it. There's a difference between brain damage in adults and works in progress. I love teenagers. They're not done. They are not done yet. And that's part of why I love them, because there's still a lot of work to be done, and we can be part of the good part of that work. Phineas Gage is an excellent example because he gave us a hint about where we might want to look in terms of adolescent development. And he turned out to be right. The parts of the brain that are developing, when they're under construction, they can look a little bit like Phineas Gage. But until we appreciate that this is a work in progress, that things are still evolving, we're not using that information properly. So I've just thrown a whole bunch of neuroscience at you. Let me put it into context for you. So here's a brain, and you know it's a brain because there are eyes in the front. That's how you can tell. And you can see that frontal cortex, the amygdala is down deep. I have to put the thalamus up in there. Please don't worry about it. It's just in case there is a neurologist or any doctor in the room and be like, well, actually, no, okay. So, but we don't really, well, of course we care, but we don't really care about the thalamus. So let's say this afternoon you're getting ready to come to this amazing event. And you thought, I'm just going to get 1 cup of coffee before the event starts, just to perk myself up. Go into your kitchen. You approach your coffee maker, and between you and the coffee maker, you run into the rock group KISS. Now, for some of you, this may be a problem. What happens? Well, your eyes see this information, and the thalamus, which is a relay, has to send a rough copy to your amygdala, your burglar alarm, to see if anything needs to be done. The amygdala is going to sound the burglar alarm. Oh, God, all right, we got to do something about this. And now I know people from Texas. Gene Simmons is not going to stop you from getting a cup of coffee. So you immediately start to prepare your roundhouse kick to take him out. And in the meantime, the thalamus is relaying that information back to the visual system, where it gets processed with more detail. And just as you're about to land the fatal blow, information gets sent to the frontal cortex, the conductor, who says, hold on, I'm getting more information from visual, getting some information from visual. You know what? That's not a real person. That's a poster. You're tired, and you need to take it down a notch. And the frontal lobe can tell the amygdala to quiet down. Now, I like to use this example because this has happened to most of you. Or not. Ever. Not even close. I like to use this example because it's pretty silly, because the ones that you have experienced aren't super fun to think about. If any of you almost had a car wreck, but not quite, and have found yourself with your legs shaking and your heart racing, and you had to literally sometimes pull over and talk yourself down, tell your body that it's okay, tell yourself that everything's fine, that it's going to be fine, and add information to that bodily sensation. That's a really important process. What if this system isn't mature yet? What if you had that huge experience you have when you almost have a car wreck, but your frontal lobes aren't totally coordinated yet? So your body has this big response that your brain does recognize, but your frontal lobes don't have that ability to be like, it's a poster, relax, calm down. That leaves us in an interesting spot when it comes to teenagers. Now keep this in mind as I tell you about one of my favorite studies in neuroscience, done by a colleague of mine, Elizabeth Phelps. She had people come into her laboratory, and she studies the amygdala and fear conditioning. And she had people come in, and her premise was, and I think this is a safe premise, are any of you afraid of blue squares? Anyone? Blue squares don't generally frighten people. So she says to people, she had people tape an electrode onto their hand, and she had them actually choose a level of shock, a little jolt. Because as psychologists, we shock everyone. That's any study involves a shock. But what she said to them was, pick a level of shock that's aversive but not painful. Aversive but not painful. And then I'm going to put you in the MRI, which is a way that we measure brain activity. And she said, I'm going to show you hundreds of shapes, lots of different colors. If you see a blue square, I'm going to shock you. Any other shape, no problem. Red square, not a threat. Blue circle, not a threat. Any other shape, nothing's going to happen. But if you see a blue square, I'm going to shock you. Puts them in the MRI, shows them hundreds of shapes, including blue squares. Here's the manipulation that was brilliant. No shocks. Not a single shock. No shocks are delivered. And she takes them out, and she looked at all the moments in time where their brain saw blue squares relative to all these other shapes. Now, none of these people had had any negative experience with blue squares, no reason to fear blue squares. And even in the setup of the experiment, they did pick shock, but not while looking at a blue square. No experience with blue squares and shocks hurting them. But as you can see, maybe I can do it on my computer here because I can't point at those screens. If you see that little guy there, that's the amygdala going gangbusters whenever people saw blue squares, even though they'd never been hurt by a blue square. Who told? Who gave this experience? So you've never had the experience, but your burglar alarm trips to a blue square? Why? Well, the frontal lobe told it. The frontal lobe told it to. The thinking part of your brain, the mature part of your brain said, hey, look, there might be a problem. This is what, burglar alarm, this is what I want you to be attuned to. And it so did. If I said behind this door, there is a terrifying monster, there are at least 3 men in the room that would have to go look anyway, so that's just that. But most of you would not have to. You would feel fearful because of the information, because you can abstract about that, you can think about that, you can understand what could happen to you, and it would trip your burglar alarm. The other piece of information in this study that she did not report on that caught my attention was this other area that was very, very active, which is actually my very favorite part of the brain. Yep, I have one. My very favorite part of the brain is called the insula. And I want to talk to you for a minute about the insula because it is the coolest part of the brain. Because how many places can you find food poisoning, cockroaches, and your own mom? I mean, come on, it doesn't get better than that when it comes to the human brain. It's tucked down inside. It's a very hard place to find. It's the only part of the covering, the cortex, the bark of the brain, it's the only part of the covering that's completely folded in and covered and protected. And when we think evolutionarily, you got to wonder why it's protected. Must be very important. It does some pretty important stuff. So if any of you have ever suffered food poisoning 10, 15 years ago and you're still avoiding that food, you can thank your insula for that. If I question any of you about it for too long, your mouth will start to sweat. You'll start to feel a little nauseous if you try to go near the restaurant sometimes. Or if, and most of you, can anyone think of a time they were food poisoned 10 plus years ago and they remember what they were wearing? And you won't remember what you're wearing any other day that week. You can remember where you were. You won't remember anything else from that week. Here's how it works. Your insula is in charge of your gut. And it keeps track of your gut feelings. But here's why it's so amazing. It can take that information up and make a memory, but it can also top-down recreate that feeling. So when you get that same sickening feeling in your stomach, it's your insula keeping you alive. Because if you were poisoned by food and you lived, and I'm so happy you did, you're an omnivore. You have other choices. Humans are omnivores. We have lots of choice. So you don't have to go near it again. So it's good thinking for your insula to actually keep that in check. Now, your mothers, or at least my mother, I'm sure no one here has ever done anything wrong, but if you have a friend who's done something wrong, or if you've heard about someone who's done something wrong, if you ever feel guilt, where in your body do you feel really guilty? In the stomach. People even say, like, oh, I'm sick about it. I feel sick about it. I feel awful about it. I committed a crime in 2nd grade. I stole a small chemistry set from my classroom. I slipped it into my backpack just because I wanted to see what was in it. It was a box. And I walked home, and I got more and more and more upset as I was walking home. And I was very lucky. I had a mom who stayed home with us. And I came through the back door, already in tears. And she said, what is wrong, sweetheart? What's bothering you? And I said, and then I vomited on her feet. And now that I'm a parent, I really respect that she didn't just leave. She was like, okay, I need to get a dish towel. I need to sit down. Please sit down. What's the matter? So I say to her, I stole this chemistry set. And she did something really interesting. She said, how do you feel right now? And I said, terrible. She said, do you like how you feel right now? No. Honey, can you think of any way you can avoid this in the future? And I remember being like, yeah, because you're not supposed to take stuff that's not yours. And she was like, Right. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to leave it in your backpack. You're not allowed to look at it. And tomorrow when you go back to school, you're going to put it back where you found it. And I was like, you're not going to call the school? She was like, no, I'm not going to call the school. But you're not to look at it. You're not to play with it. You're to put it back where you found it. And in that moment, I think my mother saved me from a life of crime. Now, I think it would have been nerdy crime. It would have been like Bunsen burners, Erlenmeyer flasks. I don't think it would have been a very successful life of crime, but she did do something important, which was that she didn't shame me. So guilt is a very important emotion for humans. Guilt's very effective. It's a very good way for us to learn. It's a very quick way for us to learn. Shame is an indictment of the whole person. And so if you see someone in front of you who's already feeling quite guilty, and vomiting and crying usually is a sign that you do feel something, if she were to have pushed farther and really given it to me and really punished me more, it probably would have shamed me. Once a young person is shamed, they have nothing to lose. If I'm a bad person and nothing I do is good, why bother trying? Guilt is a very effective thing in small amounts around a specific behavior, and the insula gives us that. It gives us a horrible feeling. Because what evolution has done brilliantly is it's taken our social norms and everything that is right and wrong in our society, and our brains have overlaid that on top of the food poisoning system. So that if you violate a social norm, if you do something wrong, you feel as sick as you do when you have bad food poisoning. That's clever. That's really smart in terms of keeping society cohesive. Now, I did mention cockroaches. So if I were to invite you to my house for a lovely dinner, and I were to bring out your favorite dessert, and just as I served it to you, a cockroach scurried off the plate. Now, I'm a good hostess. I went to Vassar. So I step on it immediately. How many of you would eat it anyway? And I know there are like 5 men in the room who are like, I'd eat it. There always are. Because boys, they're just a different, how much you pay me? That's usually what my brothers would say. We're adults, there's no payment involved. Now, you're all very bright people. Think about this for a sec. If what I just described had happened in the kitchen, and you had no knowledge of this, and there was no cockroach on your plate, and you went ahead and ate the dessert, would you have gotten sick? No. Nope, no chance. And in fact, there are cultures where people eat cockroaches. They contain tremendous antibiotic properties and a little bit of protein. Now, does anyone want to go eat one? No. And I can promise you if I continue to talk about this, you're going to ask me to stop. Because you're starting to get that feeling in your stomach. Now, why? Well, in our country, cockroaches mean something very different. Cockroaches are a sign of something. And we all learned this because of that very powerful after-school special about cockroach. No. There wasn't it. Was that big talk that your parents gave you about? No, there wasn't that either. So how did you learn about them? Well, there were lots and lots and lots of teeny tiny anecdotal but emotionally impactful stories of this or that. What do they mean in our culture? Dirty. They mean food poisoning. They mean a weird kind of danger, a sickness danger. They don't mean that in every culture. They mean it in our culture. So the reason I'm giving you that example about the insula, oh yeah, and I think I brought a cockroach, yeah. I try not to leave them up there too long because it does bother people. The insula learns. The insula learns. As you develop, it learns. And when you think about what small kids are afraid of or grossed out by, it's a lot less than what adults are. We learn what's right and wrong. We learn what's safe and not safe. We learn what's okay and not okay. So does this help us understand, why do these things seem like good ideas to teenagers? These are both places where I live. One is at our summer home and one is at our winter home. And those are both activities that I myself, being one I engaged in and one I filmed. The bottom picture, yes, one of my brothers is sledding over the head of my other brother. And for those of you who are close enough to see, they are both cracking up. The other kids are jumping off. That's the ferry dock on the island where I spent my summers growing up. And the ferry's just left. And one of the things you do as a teenager is just as the ferry's pulling away, everyone jumps into the swirl that the ferry leaves. But you have to wait just long enough so you don't get caught in the turbines, because that would be bad. I won't do it now, but I remember doing it then. And how many of you have either heard or been asked, what were you thinking? Why did you think this was smart? What made you... So there's lots and lots of work on neuroscience in impulse control, why teenagers have a hard time regulating their behavior, lots of brilliant work on that. I'm not as interested in that. I'm more interested in the, like, what got you to the point you had to regulate your behavior? Why didn't you get that pang in your stomach, like a cockroach pang of like, no, thank you. No, I'm good. That doesn't feel right to me. Why does this feel like, yeah, okay. So I decided to do something kind of radical and get some teenagers and ask them. So I asked them. I had brought them into my laboratory and had a yes button and a no button. And I said, I'm going to ask you some questions, theoretical questions. I just want you to answer simple yes or no. Do you think these things are safe or not safe, good ideas or not? I brought a couple so you can try, so you can see how difficult they are. Here's one, simple yes or no. Here's another, simple yes or no. And I'm pleased to report that my teenagers and the adults all got 100% correct. Everyone answered correctly, proving that there's no difference between 13-year-olds and 30-year-olds when it comes to decision making. That's not true. They all answered correctly. Well, what other information do we have? We have how long it took them. And this is important information. So if you look at the safe stuff, the light bars are teenagers, dark bars are adults, and the bigger the bar, the more time. And for the safe stuff, there's not much difference. But when you look at the bad stuff, the adults look just like they're looking at the good ideas. They take a smidge longer, but it's not statistically significant. However, the teenagers, on average, this is on average, took 300 milliseconds longer, which is massively statistically significant. 300 milliseconds longer to questions like, is it a good idea to light your hair on fire? Well, once, like, I had a curling iron, and it was hot. No. What are you thinking about? What could you possibly be thinking about? 300 milliseconds. It doesn't sound that long, but 300 milliseconds is a jump off a dock. 300 milliseconds is a car wreck. 300 milliseconds is a trigger pulled. 300 milliseconds is a long time in the brain world. But more importantly, what are their brains doing? And this is what really surprised me and also didn't. When you look at the adults, and this is when we compare dangerous things to safe things, the adults show activity when they're making these decisions in their insula and in their amygdala. It looks just like the blue square study. It looks just like that abstract thinking about danger. Thinking about the blue square shocking you is the same thing as thinking about lighting your hair on fire. Your bodily sense is going to go, no, nope. And it's a quick survival-related response. Teenagers not only did not have activity in these areas, where they had activity was in the most immature portion of their brains, the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex. So what were they doing? They were thinking about it. But I don't expect you to take my word for it. I brought a couple of them with me.
Good idea, bad idea to go swimming with sharks. Now, do you see a picture of this of sharks, and anybody can take this answer? You want to take that answer?
Well, sort of, just like a little picture of what could happen, but it sort of depends on if you have like a buddy you're swimming with, then it would be more safe.
You think it's a good idea or a bad idea?
Sort of both, because it could be fun, but you could get hurt too.
What do you think?
It could be a bad idea if you were doing it alone, but it could be like a good idea because it would be a whole new experience if you had like someone guiding you and who really knew how to deal with sharks.
Okay, now let's go
Now
back
watch
over
this
here
girl
to
closely.
You. Do you
Watch
think
this
it's a
girl
good
closely.
idea or a bad idea?
Well, I kind of agree with Haley that it would be a bad idea if you were alone, but I've heard, like, read magazine stories and stuff of people who have got hurt by sharks when they're swimming, so it kind of scares me a little bit, but it could be kind of an interesting experience.
Well, what do you think here on the
Well,
end?
it could be both bad or good, but I think it'd be kind of cool swimming with sharks. Just it depends, like if they like hurt you or whatever. Like it'd be a bad idea if you're like by yourself. Like I agree with Haley with that one.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here, obviously. First of all, I myself have gone swimming with sharks. There are conditions under which it's safe, but none of this information was provided to them. It was a simple, straightforward, generic, should you do this? And it's a really simple, straightforward answer, no. This is from the Lair NewsHour. They came to do a story on us, and I really wish they'd rolled the camera a little longer, because right after they cut it, I said to them, what would your parents want you to say? And they all went, oh, bad idea. No, They know, they understand, but they don't quite have the like, huh? No, it's different. No, my parents would want me to say no. It's very different from, ooh, no, that jolt. The third girl is a little different. She has an abstract response. She has a visceral response, and she even says, I've read things and heard stories about people who got hurt by sharks, so it kind of scares me, but could be interesting. And so, for any of you who no longer speak 8th grade girl, 7th grade girl, let me translate that for you. Oh God, I don't want to do this, but Haley, please don't kill me. Because Haley, 2 girls down, had already endorsed the idea. The first words out of her mouth after she flips her hair have nothing to do with sharks. The first 2 things she says is, I agree with Haley. And we're going to circle back to Haley because that's actually a very important point. The other thing about these kids that's very important to think about is this clip comes from Woodstock, Vermont. In the average day of a middle schooler in Woodstock, Vermont, what is more likely to kill you, a great white shark or Haley? I say this is functional. This is highly functional. It's absurd to us, but their energy might be in the right place. They're following the lead. Their energy might be in the right place. So the first point here is, what were you thinking? We have to replace with, what were you feeling? But do not say this to a teenager. They already look at us like we have 6 heads. This will increase it to about 10. You don't want to say, like, what were you feeling? No. But appreciate that they might not have the same gut feeling about it. We think about our gut like it's an impulsive thing. Our gut's not impulsive. Our gut is acquired over time. Our gut is a collection of experience that they don't have yet. What we might want to think about is that what we mean by maturation, your head stays about the same size as it is when it's 5. So it's not like it's growing brand new parts. What's happening in there? Things are learning to work together and converse more fluently. Information is passed more quickly. Experience shapes who talks to who and how fluently. So what we need to appreciate is that over time and with more experiences, these decisions will become more automatic. But they need the experience. So this is my son. And actually, I gave a talk here a while ago, and this was his age when I came down here the first time, ironically. He's on his tricycle. And we live, where we live, there's a little slope in front of our door that goes into a parking lot. There's also a sidewalk that goes this way. So if you want to go down our front walkway and stay on the sidewalk, you need to make a 90-degree turn. And this, again, is just a little slope. We were going out one morning. He dressed himself like this. I claim no responsibility. He says to me, Mama, because I usually carried the tricycle down to the bottom of that little slope so that he didn't have to try to make the tee because he was 3 years old. Mama, can I just try going down, do the turn? And I said, no, buddy, not this morning. It was early morning. We were on our way to a thing on campus. And he said, please, Mama. And I said, no, hon, I'm going to bring it down. And then he said it again. And if any of you are parents, you know that tone of voice that's really not asking you. What they're really saying is, I'm going to do this. Would you like to be here, or would you like me to wait until you've turned your back? Because it's happening. You want in? So I said, okay. And I thought to myself, well, unlike many situations, I can physically stop him from going into the parking lot if he can't make the turn. It's a tricycle, he's little, I can physically stop him. Okay. All right, I was like, but buddy, when you get towards the bottom, you're going to have to turn really hard. You have to pull the handlebars. I got it. So he starts coming down. I'm like, all right, Griff, turn. He yanks the handlebars, dumps the bike, somehow puts out his hands, which surprised me, to catch himself. Jumps up. I can see that his hands are scraped. He puts them behind. He's like, can you do it again? And honestly, the first thing that went through my head was like, it's 10 o'clock. I can't have a martini. How am I supposed to cope with this? And I was like, okay, hon, sure. Second time he dumped it. Third time he dumped it. Fourth or fifth time he actually made the turn. Now, not because my son is oh so great, but because any kid given enough opportunity on a tricycle will figure it out. But more importantly, when we bought his two-wheeler, and it had a front handlebar brake, and I was warning him about jamming that brake on, he's like, well, why? It'll stop the bike. And I was like, but if you stop the front tire too fast, you're going to go over the handlebars. And I said, and you're going to hit the pavement. And remember falling off your tricycle? And he was like, yeah. And I'm like, this would hurt 20 times worse. Really? Yeah, so don't do it. Can you take the cable out? And I was like, I will. I'm just use the back brake. Because he had that first experience, The second one was diminished. Would you rather have your kid fall off their two-wheeler or a motorcycle? Would you rather have them fail a test in 4th grade or in college? Where do you want the experience to happen? Because it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Now, just to, again, underscore, because whenever I hear this story out loud, I feel like it's like celebrating me as a parent. This is later that same day. Exact same day. He got his face painted, and he asked if he could jump off this thing that's on campus. And I was like, absolutely not. So he did. And again, if any of you are close enough, you can see there are huge grass stains on his knees because he couldn't stick the landing, but kept doing it and doing it. So I gave up and started photographing like a responsible parent. But here's the thing. Here's the thing when it comes to our kids.
You okay?
From the
There,
movie Finding
there.
Nemo.
It's all right. It'll be okay.
No, it won't.
Sure it will. You'll see.
No. I promised him I'd never let anything happen to him.
Huh. That's a funny thing to promise.
Huh?
Well, you can't never let anything happen to him. Then nothing would ever happen to him. Not much fun for little Harpo.
So that's the rub, right? We don't want anything to happen to him. But if nothing happens to him, nothing will ever happen to him. So how do we accomplish this? Oh yeah. There are always those times when we're not around. And they're with their friends. Here comes the best part.
Oh.
Cool. Do you think either boy would have done that walking home alone? Probably not, and there's a third person filming. And then there's Haley. So, how do we contend with such things? Well, the second point, the second thing I want to discuss, because this has so much to do with how teenagers become who they are, is that their friends matter. Seriously. Like, a lot. Like, all the time. They're really, really important to them. And we all kind of know this, but we all kind of don't know why at the same time. When we think about friends and social learning in adolescence, the average high school kid has 300 interactions with their friends every day. And then they go home, and one of the first things they want to do, text, message, Snapchat. You got to talk to those people. We did it with the telephone. I don't know if any of you remember trying to pull the telephone cord into a private space to rehash the day, and your parents are like, what could you possibly have to talk to those people that you just spent all day with? If you're a healthy teenager, the answer is, everything? Have any of you ever watched a movie with a 3 or 4-year-old? Once, or twice, or 60,000 times? Like, seriously? Again? Oh, please, Mama. All right, okay. Why? Well, they don't have a 2-hour memory. Adults have about a 2-hour working memory. So our movies are about 2 hours. And think about it, any movie over 2 hours better be good, because your memory's done, and you want out. So unless it's super interesting, it better be good. Now that said, if any of you, even as adults, you can remember most of the movie, but most of you, if you see a movie a second time, you do notice things you didn't notice before. So our memory's not perfect, but children, small children, are literally encoding tiny, like 5-minute bits while they're missing a good 15, and then they tune back in. And I'm like, oh, look at that. So every time they watch it, they do get a new movie. Now, how does this relate to middle school? Think of all the interactions in a day that happen in middle school. There's no video. But all of them have to teach you how to be cool and how to survive and how to keep Haley from hating you. So you can't watch the tape over and over. So you have to rehash with your friends. So some of you may have engaged in, some of you may have overheard conversations that go something like, oh my God, after 4th period when I was at my locker, when Jack walked by and I was like, hey, and he was like, hey, like, do you think he like thinks I like him? Because like I like him, but I don't really like him that way. But like I kind of do, and I don't know if he thinks that. And that your very good friend is like, no, totally, don't worry about it. I saw Ryan and Jim, and I said to Ryan, I'm like, does Jack know that Abby's not seeing anybody? And around and around and around and around and around. And if you overhear some of this stuff, you're like, You're still talking about that? You were talking about that half an hour ago. It serves a very, very important purpose. It's a rehash. And I'm sorry, I don't want to be sexist. That's the girl version. The guy version usually involves bouncing a basketball or having a game controller. Do you think Cameron's hot? Yeah. Cool. That's the same conversation. I have brothers. I've done the research. Same thing. I'm bouncing. I'm super pissed off at Tom. Yeah, he's a dick. Yeah. Same conversation. But you learn how to walk and talk. Teenage groups of friends walk very similarly. You develop your slang as a teenager. And your slang geographically, chronologically locks you to your peers. So be careful where you use it. If I told you guys that last night when I got here just in time to go to a wicked pissa. Does anyone know what I did? Oh, there are a few people from the Northeast around here. In Boston in the 1980s, that would be considered a really fun party. Now, whether it was so fun you peed your pants, or it was so fun you became intoxicated in a British sense, I can't say. I don't know. I used the expression. But be careful where you use it. I gave this talk once, and I used that example, and a guy, like, way up in the back of this room of, like, 500 people jumps up to his feet and is like, "Go Sox!" And I was like... So when you call for your people, use it sparingly, judiciously, keep in mind. But that slang, it keeps you with your people. If any of you are super up to date on texting, you need a hobby because it's not yours. Texting is not ours. The basics, the fundamentals, in order to keep current with our children and grandchildren and friends, we should know the basic stuff. But any of the more complex stuff, if you really are super fluent in current slang, you know, like if you try to say to one of your kids, "Oh, I went to a dinner party last night, it was lit," you will chase them out of the room in 2 seconds flat. It's not yours. Don't try to use it. And you shouldn't. You have your own. They have their own. It's unique for a reason. It's unique by design. They're forming their own groups. And I know we don't like to think about this, but these are eventually their mating groups. They're not going to be mating with their parents and their peers. No. And I know that there's infinite source of inappropriate comments, but leave it alone. It's biologically, it makes a lot of sense. Like, you should be developing your own crew, your own walking style, your own dressing style, your own speech. So when we think about this, why do we always have to go negative on it? And if it's so important and it's so influential, what's happening in the brain? If these things matter so much, there must be a brain piece to it. So my lab wanted to look at it. So we had some teens come in, and we said to them, "We're going to have you on a website." One of the great things about teens right now is they think they can be online anytime, any place. This is all fake, all photographs. No one was online. It was all pre-planned. And we said, "We're just going to ask you some opinion questions. There are no right or wrong answers. Just give us a choice." But you know, the MRI environment is very noisy, and you're going to have 4 buttons to press, which can be confusing. So we want to give you a dry run where you can see the website and give it a try. And this website keeps track of people your age in the area. And at any time, there may be a couple hundred people on, but they're your age. And then once you feel comfortable with it, we'll give you, you'll create a login and a password, and you'll log into the active part of the site. And the only difference in the second run is that once you answer, you'll get to see what percentage of people agreed with you, and here's the manipulation in the study. I have to tell you, though, that the way the website works is it may randomly randomly pulls up answers to post. There is a chance that your answer will be seen by other people online. That's it. That's all it took. 100% of our participants believed they were online, and more than 80% believed at least one of their answers would be shown. And when I asked them, I was like, "But they're all login names. They're not even your actual names." Teenagers were like, "Oh, I knew who half those people were," which is hilarious because we made all of these names up. They're like, "Everyone knows everyone's logins. Everyone knows everyone." Like, you can totally tell. Okay? But the manipulation did work. What's happening in the brains? Well, when they think they're alone up there in the top, when they think they're by themselves, you see a lot of activity in the prefrontal cortex, just like you would in adults doing the same task. The only manipulation was your answer might be seen by your peers. And what you see down below is the amygdala, and you see bilateral insula, both sides of the insula, both sides of that gut, going bonkers, because Haley might see my opinion. This is a brain system, by the way. Keep in mind, this reaction to your peers maybe seeing you, this amygdala and insula could not activate to lighting your hair on fire. This is the same pieces of brain that are like, but oh my God, online with Haley, oh God. So I ask you to think about something. You know, when I've never had a parent approach me and say, you know, ever since Sarah joined the math team, it's just been straight downhill. She's hanging around with mathletes and factoring equations, and no, that doesn't happen. We don't think about, we actually, even in psychology, we have scales to measure resistance to peer pressure. But who do we learn best from? If any of you are older siblings, you know how much you were copied. You know, and if you're younger siblings, you know how quickly you learned from watching older kids. Kids learn so fast from others, and I just showed you their brains love it. So why do we think of it as a negative thing? Because in fact, I can tell you, and I actually found this online getting ready to come down here. This is a local charity that's awesome. I can tell you on Saturday, if all your friends are volunteering, guess what you're doing? You're volunteering. If none of your friends do drugs, and you sit down with them and you're like, hey, let's go get some crack, they're all gonna look at you like, what? And you're like, I'm kidding. It's not gonna happen. We forget how many things go right when peer learning, instead of peer pressure, it's peer learning. How many of you as young people in your high school knew a lot more about the seniors than when you were a senior? No one knows the freshmen because they don't matter. We don't even know if they're gonna survive. But the seniors, if you've gotten to be a senior, you must know a couple things. The younger students know all the seniors and their drama and who they go out with and what sports they play and everything about them. Why don't we capitalize on that more? We cannot be friends with teenagers. Teenagers have their own friend groups. But we can be the adults in the environment that sort of help enable the good stuff to happen. And we just don't know quite how yet. We need to figure out ways to provide experience and daring, risky stuff that feels really thrilling, but is not lethal. We've become more and more restrictive in the best ways. Everyone wants their children to be safe and to nothing to happen to them. And that is a very, very important thing to want. But without some exploration of limits and without some chance to sort of explore the world, they're not actually that safe. They end up not making good decisions, not knowing how, not being prepared for things. This is one of those examples I'm sure you guys haven't done here. They're indoor trampoline parks. And our first-year college students very often would rather get buses and go do this on a Friday than party, which is very different from when I was in college, but I'm okay with that. You get to stand around, they play music, you get to show off in front of your friends. Everyone is there. Everyone's gossiping and talking and hanging out, and you get to do all kinds of crazy stuff. And again, you can hurt yourself, but the odds go down a lot more than getting in cars and going places and doing things that are maybe not so great. So what's my final point here? The risky decisions, the big ones in life, rely on experience. And that experience is acquired over time. And it's often acquired through failure. It's acquired through falling off your bike, by getting your heart broken, by saying that wrong thing that you really wish you didn't say in that moment, but that you'll never forget. Those aren't failures, those are guideposts, because they didn't kill you. If you're still here, you haven't failed. Now, you may have had some really trying experiences, and you may have had some setbacks and some things that you weren't happy about. But all those cliches, I would argue, actually have a neuroscientific basis, because every time you don't die, you learn. Brain development is like a ball rolling down a hill. It doesn't roll up, it rolls down. So it's going to keep going. As long as it's going, you're learning. There's no such thing as arrested development. There is aberrant development. You can have that ball bounce around more than it should, but you're going to keep learning. So if you stop seeing failure as failure, but instead as a why did this happen, what pieces of it are useful to think about, what pieces are useful to discard, and how do I move forward? It's not a failure. It's a guidepost. And I would argue that the presence of peers and peer influence often exaggerates and ameliorates, and sometimes the bad part is it can also make it really good if we create those good peer experiences. And again, we can't do it. We can't be in the peer relationship. but we can help create it. One of the examples I think about often, and this is a huge problem that is not part of this talk, but we don't have neighborhoods in our country the way we used to have neighborhoods in our country. And in our neighborhoods, there often was, how many of you grew up in a neighborhood where there were at least 1 or 2 old people that were around all the time, that somehow magically knew everybody's last name, and they're like, they were always in their window or on their porch or like surveilling somehow. And they're like, I don't know who's there, one of the Baird kids was there, I know that. And you knew you and your friends could get up to a certain amount of trouble, but if you went a little too far, someone was going to rein it in. That's the kind of stuff we've lost. We've lost this sense of like, yes, go run around, get into some trouble. But keep in mind there are going to be a couple of us hanging around, and we're not going to let it get too out of hand. But a little bit is what's going to teach you what you can do and what you can't do. But when we step all the way back, that's not good. When we hyper-control and we hyper-schedule from schoolwork to lessons to sports practice to curing cancer, back to studying for the SAT, then to bed for 5 minutes, then back to school, that doesn't give you an experience library, because I would argue that the functional purpose of all of this is to build the most beautiful library. This is my most beautiful library, where I went to college and where I work, so I'm a little biased. But there are a lot of books in there. And I think if you end up with a brain full of experience, it's like having access to a huge library, because anything you need to know, you can find. Some stuff you can find really easily, some stuff takes a little longer. But think about what wisdom is in adults. Think about how, for those of you who are older, how much less life-ending certain things are. When a younger person says, you're like, oh my God, you're not even going to believe what's happening. I went to the gas station and I could only put half a tank of gas in my car. And you're like, oh, and that must be hard for you. And in the back of your mind, you're like, ooh, they got a long way to go. The older you get, the more volumes you have, the more problems you can solve, the more things you actually feel pretty calm about. Like, no, this will work out somehow, because I know I've got something. I know I've got a book somewhere in here about this. I just got to sit down and think about it a little bit. So I would encourage you to think a little bit about that, and think about how the brain grows organically. We've been raising teenagers as long as we've been around. So it's nothing that we can't do. We just got to think about how to maximize the experience. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you for your time. This is far from a one-woman show. I could not do this work without my amazing students. Thank you for having me.